A look at the legacy of the former Star Trek star Nichelle Nichols, best known for playing Lieutenant Uhura, who's died, age 89.
There are moments in television history that transcend the screen entirely, moments that reach into living rooms, into hearts, and quietly rearrange the way people see the world around them. Nichelle Nichols created several of those moments. As Lieutenant Uhura on Star Trek, she stood at the communications console of the Starship Enterprise with a quiet authority that felt entirely natural and, at the same time, completely revolutionary. But the story of what happened behind the cameras, the struggles she endured, the battles she fought, and the truths she finally allowed herself to speak aloud is just as remarkable as anything that ever aired on television. Before her death in July 2022, Nichols began pulling back the curtain on decades of silence, and what she revealed reshaped how an entire generation of fans understood one of the most celebrated shows in American pop culture history. To appreciate what Nichols was willing to confirm in her final years, you first have to understand where she came from and what it cost her to walk onto that set in the first place. Born Grace Dell Nichols on December 28, 1932, in Robbins, Illinois, she was the daughter of a factory worker who also served as mayor of their small town. From early childhood, she was drawn to performance. By the time she was 12 years old, she was studying dance at the Chicago Ballet Academy, and by her late teens she was already performing professionally alongside legendary bandleaders Duke Ellington and Lionel Hampton, touring across the United States and Canada. She was not someone who stumbled into show business. She pursued it with discipline and genuine talent, building a career through musical theater, nightclub performances, and stage work long before Hollywood ever came calling. Her path to Star Trek was neither direct nor simple. She had appeared in a guest role on Gene Roddenberry's earlier television series, The Lieutenant, in an episode that dealt with racial prejudice, a subject that would shadow her entire professional life. When Roddenberry offered her the role of Lieutenant Uhura for his new science fiction series in 1966, it appeared to be a genuine opportunity. Uhura was not a background character. She was a senior officer, a highly trained communications specialist seated prominently on the bridge of the most important vessel in the Federation fleet. For a black woman on American primetime television in the mid-1960s, that framing was genuinely unprecedented. During an era when black women on television were almost exclusively restricted to domestic roles, maids, servants, characters defined entirely by their subservience, Uhura sat at the center of the action and was treated, within the world of the show, as an equal among equals. That was the version the audience saw. What Nichols experienced behind the scenes was considerably more complicated, and it took decades before she felt able to address it fully and openly. In the years leading up to her death, as she reflected on her life and legacy, she confirmed stories that fans and colleagues had been circulating for years. She acknowledged that her role was frequently diminished by forces within the production. Lines were cut. Her screen time was quietly reduced. Promotional materials for the show sometimes omitted her image entirely, as though the people responsible for marketing Star Trek to the public did not quite know what to do with the black woman at the center of their cast. Nichols made clear that this was not accidental oversight, it reflected a pattern of marginalization that she felt deeply but was expected to endure quietly. The weight of that pressure came to a head at the end of the show's first season. Nichols had never abandoned her love for the theater, and when an offer arrived to return to Broadway, she seriously considered leaving Star Trek altogether. She went to Roddenberry and told him she intended to resign. His response was not to argue or plead, he simply asked her to take the weekend before making her final decision. That weekend changed everything. Nichols attended an NAACP fundraiser, and a production staffer approached her with a message. There was a fan who wanted to meet her. She assumed it would be an enthusiastic young viewer of the show. Instead, she found herself face to face with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. What he said to her that evening was something she carried with her for the rest of her life. King told her that Star Trek was the only television program he and his wife allowed their children to stay up late to watch. He described her role not as entertainment, but as a statement, a demonstration to Black Americans, and to the country at large, that the future included them. He told her that leaving would be a mistake, that her presence on that bridge mattered in ways she perhaps could not fully see from where she was standing. She went back to Roddenberry's office on Monday morning and withdrew her resignation. When she shared the details of her conversation with King, Roddenberry was visibly moved. He had fought for a diverse cast from the beginning, had defended her place on the show when others pushed back, and had encouraged her to bring her full self to the role of Uhura. The support he offered her was genuine, even if it could not completely shield her from the institutional indifference that surrounded them both. Nichols stayed, and in staying, she changed the course of her own legacy and the lives of people she had never met. Among the most publicly documented of the revelations Nichols confirmed before her death was the story behind one of television's most famous kisses. In November 1968, the Star Trek episode Plato's Stepchildren aired on NBC, featuring a scene in which Captain Kirk and Lieutenant Uhura kissed, one of the earliest interracial kisses ever broadcast on American network television. The path to that moment airing was far from straightforward. NBC was deeply anxious about audience reaction. The country was raw with racial tension, and network executives feared that a kiss between a black woman and a white man would trigger viewer backlash severe enough to damage the show and the network's advertising revenue. The studio pushed for alternate versions of the scene to be shot without the physical contact. What happened next is the part of the story that Nichols confirmed with particular relish in her later years. William Shatner, she said, was unwilling to let the network win. During the reshoot, he deliberately compromised every single alternate take, mugging for the camera, crossing his eyes, contorting his expression in ways that made the footage completely unusable. He ensured that the only version of the scene that could be broadcast was the original one. NBC, left without a workable alternative, aired the kiss as it had originally been filmed. The response from the viewing public was not the catastrophe the network had feared. The majority of the letters NBC received in the days that followed were positive. Viewers recognized that they had witnessed something real, something meaningful. Even among those who wrote to express discomfort or disapproval, there was often an acknowledgement that something significant had occurred. Nichols understood that the scene's power came not from being loudly proclaimed as a historic moment, but from simply existing, from two people of different races sharing a moment of connection on screen without apology or explanation. The importance of her presence on Star Trek was not something Nichols measured only in television ratings or fan mail. The evidence was human. Whoopi Goldberg has spoken at length about watching Uhura as a child and experiencing something she had never felt before, seeing a black woman on television who was not a maid, not a servant, not a figure defined by limitation, but someone who belonged in the stars. That experience was transformative enough that Goldberg later sought out a role on Star Trek, The Next Generation, specifically because of the connection she felt to the original series. Mae Jemison, who in 1992 became the first black woman to travel to space, credited Nichols with helping her believe that such a future was possible. When Jemison flew aboard the Space Shuttle Endeavour, she carried the memory of Uhura with her. Beyond her role on screen, Nichols confirmed in her final years the full significance of the work she did with NASA in the years following the original series. After Star Trek ended in 1969, she channeled the weight of her platform into a recruitment effort designed to fundamentally change the face of the American space program. Working with NASA, she led outreach initiatives specifically aimed at encouraging women and minorities to apply to the astronaut program at a time when both groups were dramatically underrepresented. The results were extraordinary. Among those who entered the program during or following her recruitment efforts were Dr. Sally Ride, the first American woman in space, Guyon Bluford, the first African-American astronaut to reach orbit, Judith Resnick, Ronald McNair, Frederick Gregory, and Charles Bolden, who would eventually lead NASA as its administrator. Nichols considered this chapter of her work among the most meaningful of her entire life, and she spoke about it with deep pride in the years before her death. Her co-star relationships, which she addressed more candidly in her later interviews and public appearances, added another layer to the fuller picture she was determined to leave behind. With William Shatner, she acknowledged that the relationship had been complicated for much of the show's run, tensions existed, misunderstandings accumulated, but that time had softened those difficulties, and by the end she held genuine appreciation for the role he had played in her life, including the defiance he showed during the filming of Plato's Stepchildren. With Leonard Nimoy, who played Spock, she described something closer to genuine friendship, a warmth and mutual respect that made him one of the colleagues she trusted most on set. He treated her as an equal and made a consistent effort to ensure she felt valued, which mattered enormously during the years when other forces were working to make her feel invisible. George Takei, who played Sulu, brought lightness and humor to the set that she treasured. DeForest Kelley, Dr. McCoy in the show's universe, was someone she described as genuinely kind in the way that quiet, steady people are kind, without performance, without agenda. In her later years, Nichols' health became a significant part of her story. In June 2015, she suffered a minor stroke at her home in Los Angeles. Though she recovered and continued to make public appearances, it marked the beginning of a difficult final chapter. By early 2018, her family announced that she had been diagnosed with dementia, a development that led her to step back from public life. Legal complications followed involving questions about her care and the management of her affairs, eventually resulting in her son, Kyle Johnson, obtaining conservatorship in 2019 to ensure her well-being. Through all of it, those close to her described a woman who retained her warmth even as her health declined. Nichelle Nichols died on July 30, 2022, in Silver City, New Mexico. She was 89 years old. In keeping with the life she had lived, her memorial was not confined to Earth. Her ashes were launched into deep space alongside those of Majel Barrett and special effects pioneer Douglas Trumbull, a final journey that felt entirely appropriate for a woman who had spent her life pointing people toward the stars. What she confirmed before she left was not simply a collection of grievances or revelations, though the struggles were real and the injustices were genuine. What she confirmed was something larger, that a single person, standing in the right place at the right time and refusing to leave, could alter the trajectory of what other people believe is possible for themselves. She confirmed that the battles fought quietly, in dressing rooms and producers' offices and in a single conversation at an NAACP banquet, can carry consequences that ripple outward across decades. She confirmed that Lieutenant Uhura was never just a character on a science fiction program. She was proof of something, proof that the future had room for everyone, and that the woman who stood at that console and held her ground, both on screen and off, was one of the people who made that future possible.